A nice hearty crowd here this morning. Good morning, everybody. I'm Edith Macra. I'm the Director of Environmental Initiatives for the Metropolitan Mayors Caucus, filling in Mayor Kevin Burns, Mayor of Geneva, and our Environment Committee Chairman is on his way. So he will join us with the meeting in progress, but I'm happy to get us started. Welcome to my jungle. I'm just moved my house plants in, so you guys enjoy the tropical look here. So welcome to the Environment Committee meeting. We have, to those of you who are new to this, we have a good sized crowd, so we appreciate your introduction in the chat. Or if you want to rename yourself with the name of your community, so we know where you're from, we're glad to have you here. Give you a second to do that. And so for the Environment Committee topic today, we're really pleased to present an update on the Comprehensive Climate Action Plan. This has been a project that we've been working on in collaboration for a long time. So I'll give some just brief introductory comments, and then I have a short presentation. Again, if Mayor Burns comes in, we'll turn it back over to him. But we have speakers from both CMAP and IEPA here today. So thank you for all introducing yourself here. So in May of 2023, we were given an incredible opportunity to envision a low carbon future for our region and to chart a potential path to achieve this vision through climate action planning. This opportunity was the Climate Pollution Reduction Grant Program, which is a powerful piece of President Biden's climate agenda funded through the Inflation Reduction Act. The Climate Pollution Reduction Act, also known as CPRG, has made funding and technical assistance available to the largest metropolitan regions in the U.S., about 80 regions, and every state that wanted the funding. There were 46 that chose the opportunity. Some may have dropped out, but 46 that accepted the challenge. And in Illinois, IEPA is managing the state's response. So there's a statewide CPRG initiative and climate planning. And in the Chicago region, it is the caucus and CMAP and NIRPC collaborating on the planning for the Chicago Metropolitan Statistical Area, which is a 13-county region that encompasses northeastern Illinois and portions of Indiana and Wisconsin. Actually, the MSA might be a bit larger, but our study area is 13. And there's some negotiation there that you may or may not need to know about. But the CPRG program has several components and has had some intense deadlines over the last 2+ years. There have been many challenges, like working across geographies that don't align with any of the boundaries of the metropolitan planning organizations involved. Challenging. For example, CMAP doesn't really work in Indiana, so we have partnerships to do that, and the NIRPC planning area does not align with the counties assigned. CPRG has also stretched our organizational capabilities, both as CMAP as an MPO and the Metropolitan Mayors Caucus, into new areas that really none of us have expertise in, like workforce planning, our knowledge of industry, and agriculture. And then, of course, we've had shifting priorities with the new administration. So as you may have heard in the news or followed along, funding was paused. Climate has fallen as a national priority, at least from the federal government. And then the technical assistance that had been structured and provided was canceled. While the funding has resumed, precious time was lost. However, we're finally near the finish line and really thrilled to share our progress with you and invite your feedback. So before we turn it over to CMAP for the bulk of the presentation on the Comprehensive Climate Action Plan, I'm going to give a bit of an overview on the climate action planning history in our region and just a context for the plans that we have in place and the plans that are underway. Is my view okay?
Yes, looks good.
Great, thank you. So to start in the history and the strength of our region really on climate and sustainability action, we'll start with the Greenest Region Compact. And the Greenest Region Compact, as most of you know, because we have 159 municipalities, 6 counties, and all 10 of our member councils of government, sub-regional councils of governments, in support of the Greenest Region Compact goals. And the Greenest Region Compact was really, I don't want to call it an entry level because it's the largest regional sustainability collaborative for municipalities in the country. But it was designed to be very inclusive and participatory and enabling for communities of all sizes and strengths, as you can tell by the diversity of communities on the map. And the GRC laid out consensus sustainability goals. It had climate action goals in it, but it really just laid out the goals and created a framework for municipal action, the GRC framework, which many municipalities used to create their own climate action plan, but no specific targets. And climate mitigation and adaptation were just five of those 49 goals. The next step up, and this actually starts in 2017 when the federal government pulled out of the Paris Climate Agreement, that the Mayors Caucus, with our strong collaboration on the Greenest Region Compact, wanted to get engaged on climate action planning, as was being offered to the very large cities. So because we had so many communities in our 9 million metro region, we wanted a place at the table. And so through advocacy, we were successful in securing a partnership, part of a pilot project with Global Covenant of Mayors, which was actually sponsored by the European Union. And we're one of four pilot regions selected to create the first regional climate action plan. This was in 2021. All of these plans had a short timeline, just so you know, this started in late 2019 and didn't have any funding associated with it. Very, very different than where we're at now. So it was one of three climate action plans that actually got finished, and it was the very first for our region. And this is comprehensive, but not in the same way that the comprehensive climate action plan is comprehensive. So this one, the plan was very strong in adaptation. We partnered with the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, who had expertise in climate adaptation planning. So there are mitigation strategies and adaptation strategies, and it's rooted in equity, but doesn't have the exhausted equity focus that we'll see coming forward. There were 8 mitigation objectives modeled. Many of those have carried forward, and we worked with the 7-county metro region, which is both the CMAP region and the Mayor's Caucus region. The plan was tilted towards municipal action, and in fact has the goals of the climate action plan have been endorsed by 36 of the local governments. In addition to municipalities, we had a few partners like MWRD and a few counties and COGS endorsing it. And it really looked very specifically at municipal action. And you'll see the 3 levers, which I love to reference, and I love those icons at the bottom there. And it really looked at what municipalities can do on climate action to lead within their own operations, to encourage others, partners, constituents, institutions, businesses to collaborate and to take climate action, and to enact codes and policies for climate action. Then came CPRG, and was hinted that the regional approach that was taken by the Global Covenant of Mayors Partnership, the 3 regions throughout the U.S. and ours included, may have been the model for the regional approach for EPA, but took a couple of years or a year or so for EPA to craft the Climate Pollution Reduction Grant Program. And it's a very comprehensive approach that looked at every grant recipient, as I mentioned, states, and then our regions have 4 key deliverables. And I'll go over those very briefly. The Priority Climate Action Plan, that I'll talk about that in a second. Implementation grants, which I won't touch on. I think JC will probably cover most of what the implementation grant competition looked like. The Comprehensive Climate Action Plan, which is the focus of today's meeting. And then upcoming in 2026 will be a status report, a follow-up on how the region and all of the CPRG grant recipients are doing. And just for scale, the US EPA funded this, as I said, through the IRA with $1 million grant to each of the largest metro regions, and that's the scope of our grant, $3 million each to states, which is what JC and IEPA has been working with in Illinois. So the first product, under a crunchy timeline, we started this in December and finished it on March 1st, excuse me, was the Priority Climate Action Plan, which would have been very, very difficult had we not had our mitigation strategies in the in our first cap. We'll call that cap the first cap for the region. However, this one, Mayor's Caucus is the lead on this one. CMAP has provided assistance. This only focuses on mitigation, and this is because just a trivia here. This is called the Climate Pollution Reduction Grant because under the authorities of EPA, they only have the authority to regulate pollutants, and if greenhouse gases are declared a pollutant, then they're within their authorities to enforce this. So this doesn't have an adaptation focus. It's just not an EPA authority. Um, and this expands the scale from just municipal scope to any of the implementers. Again, these have been a little more challenging for us to learn about and stretch into, including industry, freight, and agriculture. This primary focus of having the PCAP, as it's called, was to set a course, think about it as a region, put this down on paper. We had a lot of checkboxes in the EPA template to tick, but this was really meant to identify priority strategies and model them so that each of the organizations that wanted to apply for a CPRG grant could do so. And so that was where we got a lot of assistance for CMAP. And for those of you who have been on the committee for a while or were in our earlier meetings, this would have been the strategies that were modeled were, for example, Metra wanted clean train car sets, and we modeled for them. There was a coalition of 13 wastewater agencies that modeled. We also had a project on electrified landscaping equipment that was modeled. So that was the primary purpose of it, and then the handoff to CMAP for the more comprehensive climate action plan. This did expand to the entire MSA, and there's been a lot of shifting, and I don't even know if Kate's going to have a chance to go into all the shifting in terms of greenhouse gas inventories in regions. But so where we're at now, and the handoff now, so CMAP is in the lead on this because they are the planning agency. And so our partners, the Northwestern Indiana Regional Planning Commission, or NIRPC, is our partner helping to work with the Indiana regions, and then Mayor's Caucus is now assisting. We're still the lead and the administrator on the grant. And so the Comprehensive Climate Action Plan, or CCAP, expands on the PCAP greatly. A lot of the strategies will carry through, so that the strategies and objectives haven't changed all that significantly. However, they've been informed by stakeholder input, and CMAP has done a great job with stakeholder engagement. There was updating of the greenhouse gas inventory and specifically setting greenhouse gas reduction sectors. And again, Kate and Mitch will talk about that and demonstrate what they've done there. Because it is and it does model these stakeholder informed strategies. So again, it's more sophisticated and more thorough and more appropriate for the stakeholders and their implementation abilities. It is a focus on air quality and public health impacts, as well as a real strong focus on low income and disadvantaged communities, or called LIDAC. But again, that has shifted, where we started out strong under the Inflation Reduction Act in the Biden administration. That has again now fallen off in terms of priorities. And so we're not required to do that, but we've done a lot of work on it. And this is also on a timeline. It is due to the US EPA on December 1st, and CMAP will talk a little bit more about the timeline for having that go public. But this is where all of the CPRG planning grant recipients, same timeline they're on. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to CMAP, and let me just give a quick introduction here to our CMAP team. So again, those of you who have been around a while, it was a little more than a year ago, September of 2024, when we first heard about the CPRG, and we had the CMAP team presenting, starting this process, and there was some opportunity to engage and provide some feedback to CMAP. So they've done incredible work in this year plus to really flesh this out, but still under construction and in draft phase. But we've got a lot to learn about. So Kate Avasek, excuse me, Avasek. I wrote phonetic prompts for Kevin, and I'm caught up on that. Kate Avasek, I know this. She leads the climate resilience programs for CMAP. Focus on increasing resilience to climate change and preserving one of the region's greatest assets, its fresh water. In addition, Kate is managing the CCAP process, the Comprehensive Climate Action Plan for the Greater Chicago region. And then Mitch Hurst is here. He's done a tremendous amount of work on it. He'll be answering questions and helping out. He's a modeling analyst at CMAP, where he focuses on emissions modeling, travel demand modeling, and policy analysis. He combines technical expertise with a commitment to making data-driven climate action accessible for local decision makers. Welcome, Kate and Mitch. Take it away.
Thank you, Edith, for that warm welcome and nice overview of the CPRG program. So good morning, everyone. It's been, as Edith said, a little over a year since we last presented to this committee, and so we're really excited to be here to share out on all of the progress that we've made. So Mitch and I are here today. We certainly have a lot to present, but we also want to engage you in discussion around different aspects of the climate action plan. While I'll be doing the presenting, much of this work is to the credit of Mitch and our larger team. And I have to say that just looking at the everyone who's on this call, several of you have also participated in this process, and we really appreciate the time and the expertise that you've brought. Just a quick agenda for today's presentation. I'll give a quick overview, project updates. Then we want to spend some time really walking through our final modeling results. We'll have time for Q&A and discussion. And then we have some facilitation questions really focused on 2 reduction strategies in the plan, reducing VMT and then enacting a state buy clean program. And then we'll wrap up with next steps. So just to jump into the project overview, Edith covered this already, so I think I can skip on ahead. You know, we're working in partnership with the caucus as well as our sister agency, NIRPC in Northwest Indiana. This is our planning area, so it spans across parts of Wisconsin through Illinois and Indiana. And we've been coordinating with the state on their planning process and implementation grant, which you'll hear more about from JC following this presentation. So through this effort, we now have a clear picture of where our region's emissions are coming from, which is mainly in industry, buildings, and transportation. And this really makes sense given our hot and cold weather climate, our relatively older housing stock, as well as the region's role as a national transportation and manufacturing hub. We've also mapped emissions by county, and this shows us 2 important things. One, that every county contributes. And then 2, that solutions need to be tailored. We can't use a one-size-fits-all approach, and that's what we've been really focused on figuring out through this process. This planning process has also made these international climate goals much more tangible. With all this talk about net zero and avoiding the worst impacts of climate change, we've been able to translate what that means for the Chicago region to be a valuable partner in climate action. This includes setting an economy-wide emissions reduction target of 85%, and then sector-specific targets. So we now know what our fair share of emissions reduction needs to be and at what rate. We're also crafting different scenarios that help us define how much work really rests on our state and local shoulders and how much of it requires continued federal action and as well as emerging technologies and development in that space. We've been harnessing the expertise across the region to help us determine what strategies could be appropriate for each sector. We know it'll require a range of strategies shown here, including electrifying buildings, promoting public transit, walking and biking, and increasing natural carbon storage through trees and other natural spaces and resources. Through a modeling process, we're providing information on which of these strategies are most effective and what implementation rates need to be in order for us to reach our goals. This information is tailored based on each county's condition, which is really the level of granularity that we're able to get through in this modeling effort. So we're not assuming the same rates of change across the board, and we know that some strategies will be more effective in some locations over others. And we've also heard from our partners that this is a key piece to inform their own work, especially counties, given that much of this information is available at the county level. We've also, as Edith mentioned, we've definitely cleared some major milestones. If we didn't, we'd be in big trouble right now. And so we are racing to meet the submission deadline to EPA the very beginning of December. And then what we're going to be doing is reformatting the plan to have a flashier public release in early 2026. Along the way, we've engaged a whole range of partners. We've had a steering committee, 3 sector working groups, and a community working group guiding the content. We've also worked through our governance committees at CMAP, NIRPC, as well as working with this committee to ensure alignment with regional priorities. And then lastly, we released a public questionnaire and held community workshops to ensure the plan reflects local priorities and challenges. More specifically, through our engagement activities, we solicited input from people from across the region about the effects of climate change, barriers and opportunities to reduce GHGs, and how reduction strategies can maximize benefits to communities that are impacted most. These activities resulted in 4 meetings with our community working group. We held 6 workshops. Through the workshops, we also created ready-made workshop in a box materials that could be used beyond the creation of this plan. And then we received over 400 questionnaire responses really across the region with some good representation in our suburbs as well. And to share just one important aspect of what we learned through these activities, we were really focused on trying to identify priorities that we could uplift and weave into the plan. So community priorities that really connect with the climate action strategies that we were recommending. And so I have them listed here. Clean air and related health benefits was at the top of everyone's list, pretty much across the activities. And then in no particular order, we also heard priorities around safe and accessible bike ped infrastructure, access to and more reliable transit, lower energy and water bills, also extreme weather preparedness and reduced risk overall to events like extreme heat and flooding, more trees, natural open space, and as well as workforce opportunities that create new jobs and can support training. Lastly, I just want to share, since we're really in the thick of drafting the climate action plan, we've really been reflecting on the main goal that we have in mind as we do this, which is really to give this larger region a clear, practical roadmap for reducing emissions in a way that can work for our communities. So we're first focusing on the strategies that have the greatest impact. There are dozens of things that we could do. And honestly, like most of those things are in this plan as well. But our modeling is also showing what will make the biggest difference for cutting emissions and where investments will matter most. And so we want to uplift those in the plan. Second, we're grounding this plan in credible regional specific data. This creates a common fact base that we can all rely on. So when questions come up from stakeholders, constituents, or when we need to make the case for a specific policy or funding, we can point to the same evidence. Third, this plan gives us a stronger regional voice. Actions by a single county or municipality, as many of you know, to shift state or federal policy on its own can be extremely difficult, if not impossible. But together with one coordinated plan, we can shape policies that bring real benefits back home. And we also want this plan to be useful at the local level. Edith already spoke about the regional climate action plan that does have much more of a municipal focus, but we're hoping that some of the tools and examples and case studies that we include in this CAP can help move projects forward in your own organizations and uplift the good work that you've done. And then finally, we want the plan to provide inspiration. So along those same lines, we want to highlight the real world progress within our region to really demonstrate and show what's possible and give confidence that we can achieve meaningful results. So in short, we want this plan to provide the region with the evidence, the tools, and the influence to make the biggest impact. So now I'm going to shift into our final modeling results. And we have results for both the economy-wide economy-wide results and sector-specific results. So just to spend a little bit of time talking about how we got here and how we set the reduction targets for the plan. We were working with our steering committee, and through that process, we decided that the plan was going to set an economy-wide target to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 80 to 85% from 2005 levels by 2050. So gross emissions here, we're talking about the total amount of GHGs emitted by all sources within our study area without accounting for offsets from natural carbon sequestration from trees or wetlands, for example. And then an economy-wide target means that it encompasses all of the sectors within our economy, recognizing that emissions must be reduced across the board to achieve meaningful progress towards our climate goals. This approach also aligns with targets that have already been set in the region, including the caucus's climate action plan. And it's also consistent with GHG targets of other major cities and states with ambitious climate initiatives. And we also decided to include sector targets, which are developed based on the impacts of our modeled strategies for each of the sectors. So to translate the reduction target into specific amounts, we developed a 2005 baseline inventory using a tool from US EPA, their state inventory tool. And we found that in 2005, this greater Chicago region produced 192 million metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. So 192 is our baseline. And our 2020 inventory shows that emissions have already dropped by 20% to 154 MMT, which is pretty significant, and we are excited to see. So what that means is that the plan really needs to show how we're going to achieve an additional 65% reduction in emissions, which equates to 125 million metric tons by 2050. Oops, sorry about that. So there's clearly, we still have a long way to go, and that's where our modeling comes into play. So to model a pathway for the region to achieve that additional 65% reduction in GHGs, we took an iterative process that relied on research, best practice, and stakeholder input. First, we developed a slate of decarbonization objectives and strategies across all sectors of the plan. Then late last year, we vetted those with our working groups. And from there, we refined the list. We worked with our consultant, E3, to determine which of those strategies could be quantified in their pathways model and which had the greatest potential for reductions. So from there, we identified 36 total strategies to quantify, which constituted our first modeling run, which took place of spring in this year. Then we took the summer to vet those initial modeling results with our working groups, and we incorporated some of the feedback we received into our final model run, which we're presenting to you all today. So the plan is presenting three complementary scenarios. We have the current policy scenario, the state and local portion of the plan implementation scenario. Oh, sorry. We have the current policy, plan implementation scenario, and then the state and local portion of that plan implementation scenario. So the current policy scenario, it's like our business as usual scenario. It allows us to project future emissions under existing state and federal policies. So we can see how far those policies will help us advance in the region towards meeting the decarbonization goals and identify which reductions are really needed from there. The plan implementation scenario, this reflects the reductions resulting from the specific measures that are included, or I should say the specific strategies that are included in the plan. So this is what aligns with that 80 to 85% reduction target. And then lastly, we wanted to understand of that plan implementation, how much of that, how much of those emissions could be led by state and local actors. So what we did was we based the state and local portion on existing policies and programs adopted either within this region or in many cases in other places in the United States In some cases, these assumptions modeled under the state and local portion differ slightly from the plan implementation scenario. So you can imagine that often the plan implementation scenario is using more ambitious implementation rates and accelerated timelines to reach the 80 to 85% reduction target. So the plan implementation scenario includes 36 modeled strategies spanning all sectors. These strategies really work together to represent the package of actions that are needed to move the region toward the 85% gross emissions reduction target. To determine how quickly and fully each strategy could be implemented, we relied on two key inputs. First, we relied on existing state and local policies, both those already implemented within a portion of our region, but also from leading states, counties, and municipalities across the country. So this approach really grounds our assumptions and policies that have already been proven to be feasible, which is essential. And then we looked at additional analysis to inform supplemental assumptions in cases where existing policies, say in California or Washington, still weren't ambitious enough for us to reach the plan's target. And so this allowed us to balance the real world examples and ambition needed to reach the plan's goals. And this dual approach helps us ground the model in what's existing policy and then extends it a bit through additional analysis, meaning that the strategies are ambitious, but they're also not speculative. And it also reflects a realistic ramp up period for implementation, recognizing that transformation takes time while also pushing for the urgency needed. So through the vetting process with our working groups, we made some changes in the final model run that I thought would be interesting and important to share with you all. First and foremost, a lot has changed. So we updated the strategies to reflect recent federal policy and funding changes. This includes the removal of IRA, EV, and charging incentives, fuel economy standards, and the federal appliance standards. So for the IRA incentives, we translated those into a state replacement program. And so those are modeled in our state and local scenario instead of something that was previously considered current policy because we assumed it was going to happen. We also shifted several strategies from the state and local scenario to the plan implementation scenario based on recent limits on state authority to implement things like the EV sales mandate. So again, we're still including them in the plan, but we're no longer considering them a state and local strategy because states are not able to implement those as they were prior to this year. Another change we made was to incorporate feedback from our working groups as well. Okay, so that's enough about the process. Here are the results, and the results we thought were really encouraging. The modeling shows that the region can meet the target of an 85% reduction by 2050. Current policies like CJA in Illinois gets us to a 36% reduction by 2050. So that's shown in the green. That still leaves a big gap. So how do we reduce further? In the blue line, we have the state and local actions. So these actions alone show us that we can reach a 58% reduction by 2050. This scenario highlights the opportunities, again, where local governments can lead, but also it shows the limits that without federal support, we really fall short on the plan's target. So then in the orange line, we have the plan implementation scenario. So again, really what the plan is recommending. It adds more than 30 modeled strategies across 7 sectors. And with these actions, we can actually reach an 86% reduction by 2050, enough to hit the plan's target. And something that we think is important is that this modeling shows that it's achievable without relying on carbon capture and storage, though we did model some limited application of CCS as an optional strategy to see where it could come into play. So looking at the state and local, this scenario highlights again the critical role of state and local action in achieving our climate goals. We see here that these actors can drive major progress in areas like buildings, waste, agriculture, and increasing natural carbon sequestration. But federal support still remains essential in other sectors, especially in industry. And in other sectors like transportation, which is shown in blue at the top, falls somewhere in between where we can see some significant reductions in this scenario, but more reductions that are definitely needed through federal actions. Um, One thing I would call out with respect to buildings, you can see here, really they present the largest reduction opportunity for state and local actors. And I'm probably preaching to the choir here, you already know this. But by 2050, we found that commercial and residential emissions that are shown in the different shades of yellow in this chart can fall 78% below 2005 levels under state and local actions alone. So there are several model measures contributing to these reductions, but just to highlight a few critical ones, they're driven by building performance standards, clean heat standards, all electric new construction, as well as energy management systems. And with many of these strategies relying on electrification, it's also critical to ensure that this electricity is provided by carbon-free sources in order for us to really achieve these emissions. Transportation reductions are smaller than building reductions, but they're still significant. So with the state and local actions alone, transportation emissions can decline by 64% by 2050. These are driven by VMT reduction strategies, vehicle miles traveled reduction strategies, a low carbon fuel standard, as well as state and local EV incentives that replace expiring federal programs for EV purchases and charging infrastructure. And while industrial emissions see smaller reductions under this scenario, there are still key strategies like the implementation of a state buy clean program that we'll talk about today, and facility emission standards that can produce reductions as a result of local actions. So then we have the full plan implementation scenario. And in this scenario, it achieves an 86% reduction, as I mentioned, in gross emissions by 2050. And to get there, this scenario importantly highlights several strategies that really require federal action. So for example, EV sales requirements previously adopted in states like California that are now facing legal challenge, those are assumed to be restored at levels that are equivalent to advanced clean cars 2 and advanced clean trucks. These policies are really essential and really demonstrate through our modeling how effective they can be. And so they're really, we need them in order to rapidly transition the vehicle fleet, as sales requirements remain the most effective tools for rapidly transitioning the vehicle fleet. Another example to highlight is stronger federal action on industrial emissions. Industry represents the largest gap between what can happen at the state or local level and where federal action is needed, particularly in large emitting sectors like iron and steel. And lastly, before I pause for some questions, as I mentioned earlier, the plan includes sector targets, and we develop these from the modeled strategies and results for each of the sectors. These targets are shown in this table. And what we did was we also established interim targets for 2035 to help guide resource allocation, highlighting really which sectors can decarbonize more rapidly and allow us to prioritize investments where and when they'll have the greatest impact. And alongside the plan's full sector targets, we'll also be showing the state and local contribution. So this can help illustrate where local actions can be most impactful, with buildings being a strong example, like I just explained. So we'll have similar targets for our state and local scenario. So with that, now I'm green. I think maybe I'll pause. Are there any questions to address in the chat before we head over to Menti?
Yep, there are some, Kate, and
Okay.
Mitch has been doing a great job here answering some of them. Mitch, you want to read them through, or you want me to? The ones that you can't answer.
Yeah, sure. I've touched on a few of those questions already in the chat, but Ian, I'll answer your question in verbally, and I'll also post my thoughts in the chat. So Ian's question is if electrification and all electric construction are a key part of our strategies, does the model include downstream or upstream emissions from power generation? And then he notes that, some recent research has shown that some of the benefits from electrification can be eaten up if the increased power needs make the electricity that we're using more reliant on natural gas or other more carbon intensive forms of energy. And relatedly, there was also a question earlier about how we are thinking about data centers. Those are certainly also a kind of competing factor in terms of just increasing strain on the electricity grid. So in Illinois, we have CEJA, which does go a long way and does certainly make large impacts on decarbonizing our electricity grid, as well as um, as well, and set some targets that are pretty ambitious. There is a ongoing discussion about some trailer bills to add on to CEJA that would be more focused on kind of increasing the ability to increase that supply. Um, but in our plan, we do kind of make the assumption that we are able to produce enough clean electricity in order to meet the goals of CEJA. So that's something that's included in the current policy scenario. For Indiana and Wisconsin, they do not have a similar bill currently, but in our planned scenarios, we do make an assumption that they will adopt something similar to CEJA, where 95% of the electricity that would be used within the plan would be coming from carbon neutral sources. So this is certainly a big assumption, and there's a lot of work to be done to ensure that we are kind of reaching that assumption and do have enough electricity. I think one thing that has been notable in this plan to us, and something that we do share in the full plan, is just how much electricity is needed in order to meet the increasing needs. So if all of these different sectors are increasingly electrifying and we're adding additional load through things like increasing data centers and other just things that need clean electricity, it's a pretty it's a lot of road on on our uh our grid. And so we do have a separate project here at CMAP that we've been working with ComEd directly on. It's more focused on transportation and thinking about kind of the electrification impacts on the grid side of electrifying large truck fleets and electrifying passenger vehicles. And so it's certainly something that I think ComEd is also very focused on, but it is certainly, I think, a good area to focus on, because as Ian mentions, if we are electrifying everything, but the electricity is not clean, then that certainly mutes the decarbonization progress that we're making. And I see several other questions have popped up as I was chatting, so I'll talk through
And
them.
I'd like to direct one to Kate.
Sure.
Start with the question from Warren Levy about the involvement of public health districts and hospitals. I wonder if you can jump back to the stakeholder groups, which you kind of went through quickly, but let's just look back at that and then see if we had any involvement from public health professionals or agencies.
Um, yeah, I mean, in our community working group, we did have a representative working in the area of public health, who's
Do
at
you mind hopping back
UIC.
to the to that slide with the stakeholder groups because it was at the beginning?
Yeah, I don't think it's going to show up
Oh, a
there.
second. Okay, never mind. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I would say in short, like yes and no. There's some
Mhm.
representation through our various groups, but we didn't reach out to a. Yeah, I think there's more that could be done there. And actually, the next slides will jump into the benefits analysis.
Mhm.
Um, and so I think it just represents room for opportunity for us to engage those groups coming out of the plan development.
Fair enough. Yeah, Warren, I couldn't recall that there was a specific public agency in the. Go ahead.
Yeah. So look, I think all of this is great. It's clearly interdisciplinary, multi-jurisdictional efforts to look across sectors. It's from the environmental perspective, it adds on to existing multi-jurisdictional planning efforts, from emergency management as well as, increasingly in public health. And I think that, everyone's got kind of their own focus and contribution to this enormous task, but I don't think that the answer is, let's develop the plan and then, show it to these guys. I think you want to engage with them while you're
Mhm.
developing the plan. And I'm saying the same thing to the public health people.
Mhm.
How come, you're not reaching out to environmental groups to develop community health improvement plans? But increasingly in Illinois, including in the Chicago metropolitan area, health plans are reflecting both the contribution that healthcare facilities can make to climate change mitigation, but also adaptation strategies. And
Mhm,
I just think that let's not wait too long in the process to integrate
mhm.
these areas of expertise.
Thanks, Warren. Certainly a fair critique.
Yep, good point. Okay, so we do have some other good questions in there that haven't been addressed. So from Scott Kuykendall, what does clarify? What does local mean county level as well? I think I know the answer, but I'm going to give it to Kate or Mitch.
Go ahead, Mitch.
Yeah, we do have so county level data is the lowest level of geography that we have available for this plan, just again due to changes in, you know, uh, working with, needing Wisconsin data, needing data for counties outside of the CMAP region in Illinois, needing data for Northwestern Indiana. So we have data available for the counties, and we can get to county level impacts, and that is something that we plan to share next year is kind of county level summaries. Um, just focusing on specific strategies that can be more effective within certain counties. Because as Kate mentioned, the strategies that are needed for Lake County, Illinois and Lake County, Indiana are very different, but both important.
Mhm.
Yeah, and
Interesting.
maybe similarly, I see from Jason asking if the plan will differentiate between state and local policies or strategies that are recommended. And we do detail, when we're talking about state and playing an implementation role versus local governments. And so I think that differentiation will come through in the plan.
Mhm. Yeah, looking at the rest of them. So Allison still has a question. Allison Lindbergh from Aurora still has a question. Allison, if you want to read it,
Sure.
come off. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks. So I thank you, first of all, just thank you for providing all this information. Just from like a policy and implementation perspective, I just have some concerns about actually achieving the electrification needs, especially when it comes to local level policies. So I'm just curious, is there are there certain cities that should be the focus to trying to achieve electrification? Just for example, is it just as simple as like the largest cities with the most buildings should be trying to move forward the most quickly? Or do some buildings have significantly more greenhouse gas emissions per capita in this region? And should we be trying to focus on them first?
So Really good question, and I kind of want to say yes to both aspects of it. Um, Certainly there are, areas with more buildings, more people, more density are probably going to have, more total emissions, usually lower per capita emissions as well. But more people tend to have more activity, which leads to more emissions. There are certain building types though that do kind of flip that around a little bit. There was mention of data centers. Those are very intensive buildings. There's also certain types of buildings like fast food restaurants are very energy intensive. So areas that have, or those are, there are specific building types that use a lot of energy and focusing on different strategies kind of targeted to certain buildings, some certain commercial building types, I think are also, things that we could continue to look at and think about. Um, we have focused more on the side of trying to think about, does it make sense for something like building performance standards? Does it make sense to try to have every single municipality be passing its own set of building performance standards, or does it make sense to try to just, have it done at the state level or at a county level or a higher level of government to kind of bring everybody along? So there's certainly a delicate balance there. Certainly, I think there's room for municipalities to lead in a lot of these areas. And we have some aggressive implementation dates within our modeling assumptions. So I think there's plenty of room for municipalities to kind of take a lead and set ambitious targets themselves or demonstrate, hey, these things this is how we've done this, and this is how we built a coalition in order to help, pass these pieces of legislation and set a great example for our counties and states. But eventually, I do think it is important to think about adoption at higher levels so that we make sure that all municipalities are participating. Because even smaller municipalities, even smaller counties, they still have emissions that we do need to decarbonize, and so we kind of do need to focus on everybody. But I think there's certainly room for municipalities to be leaders there.
There's a comment from Ian just about the MSA region. And Kate, I don't know if you want to comment on the the adaptations we made in our planning region relative to the MSAs and working with Wisconsin and Indiana.
Yeah, I wasn't aware of Kenosha dropping out of the MSA. They certainly, especially the city of Kenosha, has been very engaged and interested, and I mean the county as well. So um, we did, we were given this geography that certainly doesn't align with any actual regional government. And so we wanted to make sure that the counties we were helping to plan for were interested in participating. So what we did was we confirmed participation, made some changes, notably to have NIRPC's full planning area covered because, coming out of this, they really want to have a plan that covers their full jurisdiction. So
I'll just add to that. So the Kenosha, the county, was a little bit of an odd fit to have one county when the policies were aligned. Wisconsin has a very strong statewide planning effort, so we that's one of the reasons that there may have not been as much engagement or focus on Wisconsin, but again they were interested at the table. It was just a lot of overlap.
I do think, I shared a lot, and so I would like to switch over to Mentimeter. And I think we have 10, do we have 10 minutes left, Edith? Or,
You do have 10 minutes left.
okay.
That'll
All
give
right. So
JC. Yeah. Go ahead.
yeah, if everyone could scan the QR code or go to menti.com and enter in this code. I'll limit the number of questions that we ask, but I am interested to hear from the bigger group. Um, all right, so we have people joining. Great, 21 and growing. Do you think I can move on?
People
Maybe
will catch up.
if someone could drop the info in the chat,
Okay.
just for anyone who needs to. Okay. Okay, so just, big picture, do these results align with your expectation of what's possible for our region? Good. Yeah, we've heard data centers as a new challenge is certainly true, and we've heard that's been a big topic of discussion. But we need to act quickly, yeah. Maybe expecting electrification, but not as much to meet the goals. Challenging but achievable. If elected officials can align better, possibly state level would be more effective, if at all feasible. We'll need some policy wins. New construction electrification requirements will be difficult. Okay. So yeah, overall, if we have the commitment there, um, it sounds like people feel like this is a good start. Um, and then last question here, what stands out to you about these results? What stands out most? Something that's either, I guess we've heard the encouraging. Anyone who wants to elaborate a little bit more on your response in the last question, something encouraging or concerning related to these results, if there's anything else you want to share. So I'm seeing kind of a mix of encouragement and concern, citing, what can practically be achieved, that we really can't do it all alone. We're really going to need federal action. Is absolutely the case. Involvement of sectors, including public health. Okay. Great. Well, if you could keep Menti open, I think you can continue to share responses. I'll just switch back over to the presentation and let's see. I think what I'll do is, I don't think we're going to have time to get into VMT and buy clean discussion, Edith. Should I just focus on the public health and the air quality and public health benefits?
We can
See where we go.
see what the group wants. JC, just clarifying, you'll need 10 minutes, correct?
Yep,
We end at 11.
that is what I'm planning on.
Okay, great. So you can
Okay,
go to
let me
10:45.
Yeah, let me stick with the modeling, and I think once we meet the milestone of completing the plan, I definitely see opportunity for us coming back to this committee to dig into some of the strategies a bit more. So the last portion of our modeling that I want to share is on the benefits analysis. And as you all know, the same strategies that cut GHGs also reduce harmful co-pollutants like fine particulate matter, nitrogen oxide, sulfur dioxide, and VOCs. And so to quantify these benefits, we used EPA's co-benefits risk assessment called COBRA, which is a screening model to link fuel use and technology change, like shifts in vehicle type and vehicle miles traveled to changes in ambient air quality. And so these results are available at the sector level and also at the county level, which gives us a clear picture of where improvements in air quality and health outcomes are most significant. So this table here shows projected reductions in key pollutants for 2035 and 2050 under the plan implementation scenario for all sectors. These are the pollutants that most affect respiratory and cardiovascular health. So reductions in NOx and VOCs. They also limit ozone formation, while PM 2.5 reductions directly reduce the risk of asthma, heart disease, and premature death. The scale of these reductions demonstrates that climate strategies are also public health strategies. Even as numbers differ by pollutant and year, the trend is consistent that deeper decarbonization delivers cleaner air if you just look at the side-by-side 2035 percentages versus the 2050 percentages. And I'll quickly note that the proportion of these pollutants that come from sources impacted by this plan can vary. So while the aggregate PM 2.5 reduction is only 17% in 2050, which you might be thinking, well, that's hardly anything. When you consider that only about a quarter of PM 2.5 pollution is associated with energy use, the reduction becomes much more significant. And within major sectors of focus of the plan, industrial PM 2.5 drops 35%, and on-road transportation related sources related to PM 2.5 drops 86%. A similar story is true for VOCs. The largest source of VOCs is from solvent utilization, which isn't something that's addressed in this climate action plan. Only 30% of all VOC emissions come from one of the big three sectors within the plan. VOCs from transportation, buildings, and industry, we see those decline by 47% over the course of by 2050 through implementing the plan. And as I just mentioned, we used EPA's COBRA model to translate pollutant reductions into public health outcomes. The avoided deaths, hospitalizations, and avoided instances of asthma are significant, giving clear evidence that the benefits of this plan aren't just about climate, they're about cleaner air and healthier communities. This chart provides an annual estimate of avoided health conditions for 2050, where we could expect 1,600 fewer premature deaths, over 400 fewer heart attacks, 1,400 fewer hospital visits, and nearly 4,000 avoided instances of asthma onset annually. These results show that the benefits of climate action aren't just long-term global outcomes, but immediate local improvements in health and quality of life. And so, in short, this plan is as much about climate as it is about cleaner air and healthier communities, and just, I think underscoring the points that Warren made about really engaging with the public health community. So with that, I'm going to have to conclude, and again, promise that we'll come back later. But just a quick note on the next steps. We're finalizing this plan. We're presenting it to our steering committee this time next week, actually. We'll be revising it based on feedback. So I just want to say there is still time for us to incorporate your feedback that we've received today. We'll be submitting the plan by the deadline, and then, as I mentioned, we'll be releasing the plan to the public in early 2026. And you'll get this with the slides, but as I mentioned, we want to try to highlight local examples. So in the slides, you'll have this QR code, and there's a short form if there's a project that you're working on now or completed that you would like to see highlighted in the plan. Please just take a few minutes and fill out the form. We'd really appreciate it. So thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Kate. A little bit early. There is a question from Chris Murphy, which maybe Mitch can answer. How did you calculate the health benefits?
Yeah, and Chris, I'll share the tool and drop a comment in as well, so you have the links. But basically, our tool pathway, our modeling tool pathways, in addition to calculating the greenhouse gas reductions from our modeled strategies, also can calculate the reductions in several co-pollutants such as PM 2.5 or NOx or VOCs. So we had just kind of, basically here's our, our an inventory from like the national emissions inventory. So we understand kind of what the baseline of each of these pollutants are within our region. From there, we have kind of this, under our three scenarios, here's how much they reduce under the current policy scenario. Here's how much they reduce under the state and local scenario. Here's how much they reduce under the full plan implementation scenario. So what we did was understanding that, there's a lot of assumptions that go into tools like these, and public health benefits are certainly, I think, very impactful, but very heavy numbers that we want to, treat with some caution and understanding that these are estimates. So what we did was we calculated, we took the reductions in things like PM 2.5 and we ran those through an EPA tool called Cobra, which does kind of has a series of assumptions that you are able to calculate, like some of those public health benefits that Kate shared. For certain health benefits, it gives you a range of outcomes. So like premature deaths, for example, it gives you a low estimate and a high estimate. So some of these numbers, they acknowledge that, it is somewhat of a range, and there are many other factors that can go into a premature death that kind of contribute alongside things like air pollution. But essentially, we were able to use that tool Cobra in order to calculate the public health benefits associated with the reductions in criteria air pollutants as a result of the modeled strategies. And then we compare those basically from the current policy scenario, and then do a comparison between our state and local and our plan implementation scenario, so that we at least understand, in comparison to our baseline, which is also using these same assumptions, what is the difference between those, which gives us a little more confidence in being able to kind of speak to some of the differences, and at least put those into some context. And I'll drop a link to the tool as well.
See, we are all, we're all caught up on questions. So with that, I just want to welcome Mayor Burns, Chairman Burns, who is here now, but wants me to keep going on the introduction. So Mayor Burns, if you just want to tell people you're here, say hello, or be off camera. He did
I do
convey.
apologize for the delay. I had to tend to something else this morning, but it's so good to see such a great group on board. So thank you very much.
Actually, he was joking. We had our press conference for the Feed the Cart campaign yesterday, which involves introduction of a new character named Loop. And part of his responsibilities as the very dignified chairman for the Environment Committee, mayor of City of Geneva, as well as our former executive board chairman, was to don some silly glasses.
I'm sorry, what are you talking about, Edith?
Thank you, Mayor. I'm just so that was the reason he said he wanted to come on camera, but thank you for doing that. Yeah, we did have some.
Remember, that never happened, anybody, so don't talk about that.
Nobody got a screenshot. You're good. So thank you, Austin, for for posting that link, and Juliet. We're going to talk about that next Environment Committee. But so anyway, back to
Tori. What the hell are you laughing at?
We did have a very good press conference yesterday. It's a great program. Come back in November to learn about that in details, and we've got a link in the chat there. But so back to CCAP and some to wrap this up. As I mentioned earlier, the state of Illinois is also the recipient of a CPRG grant. So they have been working at the state level on their grant, and JC's got an update for how that planning is going. Just notably, and I'm sure JC will talk about it, but the focus for the Illinois EPA has been on securing and then implementation funding. So you've probably seen some grant programs that are spinning out, but that has been a focus for IEPA. So JC Kibbe is the climate advisor for the state of Illinois, where he analyzes and develops and implements climate and energy policy. He helped negotiate and pass the very famous Climate and Equitable Jobs Act, or CEJA, and is leading implementation of the state's $430 million climate pollution reduction implementation grant. So, JC, welcome.
Great. Thanks, Edith, and thanks everybody so much for having me. I'm going to try to share my screen here. Is this showing up okay for folks?
Not yet. It's not yet. It's coming, I believe. Said you've started screen sharing, but not showing yet. There you go. It's all set.
Okay.
Great. So hey everybody. So I've got a little less time than the CMAP folks, so I won't be able to dive quite as as the CCAP, although I won't dive as much into that as I said. So on the CPRG grant, just a bit of quick background about what emissions look like in the state of Illinois. This is fairly typical for the U.S. Overall. I would note that we've made a lot of progress on the power sector in recent years. We've got a bit higher agricultural emissions than some other states, as well as a bit higher industry. This is statewide. So these numbers look a bit different than they...
JC, your slide did not advance. Right now we're on your cover slide. So if you're sharing data, we're not seeing it.
Let me try this again. Is that working now?
Not quite yet. Okay, we do see the presenter view. I mean, the speaker's view now.
Okay. Sorry about that.
There you go. That looks
Sure,
great.
what's going on there? So just a quick overview of where emissions are overall in the state. This is fairly typical of the nationwide emissions profile that you'd see, just noting that we have a bit larger agricultural emissions here in Illinois than in many other states, higher industry as well, and we've made a lot of progress on the power sector in recent years. Just to dive in a bit further on that, as the CMAP folks mentioned earlier, 2005 is the baseline. And basically, anytime you hear folks talk about reducing emissions X, they're talking about comparing that to 2005. So just to see where we've come since then, this green dotted line at the top shows that we've reduced our emissions significantly since 2005. A lot of that's come in some of that's come in the transportation sector. That's largely owing to gains in fuel efficiency. Not so much progress on agriculture or buildings, and we'll talk more about that in a minute. A bit on industry, largely due to reduced use of coal, and very significant progress in the power sector, again, primarily due to reduced use of coal. But that just provides some background. In order to understand where we are going, I think it's important that we understand where we are coming from. So I want to talk now about the CPRG grant. We received at the state a $430 million award in total. This was the third largest in the country. So we're proud of a really diverse set of emissions reduction measures, I think, that we put together here, and had a lot of great feedback from different stakeholders to help shape that. Just an overview of all these, you can kind of see where the largest chunks of the money are. On the building side, this is really focused on residential, and I'm going to dive more into all these programs in just a moment. And you heard from the CMAP folks some of the public health and other benefits that come from these. So I'm just flagging that on the right side here. Transportation is the next largest. That's focused in our grant almost entirely on the heavy duty sector, and that's both because you get they're very outsized in terms of the overall greenhouse gas contribution to the transportation sector, and also because they have quite an outsized public health impact and a disparate one. On the agriculture side, helping to implement sustainable agriculture practices. Industry, we actually put in 2 applications. One of them was a regional one with several other states. That unfortunately was not successful. We put in with like Michigan, Minnesota, Wisconsin, and some others. That application was not successful, so that's why you see the funding on the industry side being a bit smaller than you would expect given industry's share of our overall emissions. And the power sector here is relatively small, not because the power sector is not important, it is, but rather because the intent of the CPRG was to fill in gaps from our existing emissions reductions measures, and there were just much fewer gaps on power than in some of these other areas because of CEJA and all the other things that you all are aware of. So diving now, I don't have time to get way into detail on every single one of these, but I do want to flag a couple of these CPRG measures that may be of special interest to this group. On the building sector, just to note that there's so these icons here, the tools, these represent like programs that are direct implementation of infrastructure. The megaphones are programs that are intended for outreach and supporting people in navigating clean energy programs. For instance, on the Clean Building Navigator program, we heard directly from a lot of folks that maybe they want to electrify their homes, but when they get a new appliance, they're in a rush. They don't know how to find a contractor that knows how to do it. They don't know what all the rebates are and where to get them and how to apply for them. So this is really hand-holding for folks through that process of getting clean energy measures in their home to make that easier for them. The little hard hat person here, these are workforce training measures. And you see this show up in a couple of different sectors. And the little city hall, these are specifically for municipalities. So I want to call out a couple of these, one being the accelerating stretch code adoption. I heard a couple of folks flag earlier the challenges with electrification standards for new construction. We hear that, and we heard that during the stakeholder outreach as we were developing this plan. So this measure is specifically intended for municipalities to provide them with technical support and, if needed, funding to adopt those stretch building codes that we now have in the state. The community geothermal, it doesn't necessarily need to be for municipalities, but it can be. So this is to adopt, small district geothermal networks. And the small utility clean energy planning program, this is for municipal and cooperative utilities who want to do planning, modeling, look at resource portfolios in the future where they're emphasizing clean energy. This is another one where we heard directly from a lot of stakeholders that was a need. So I want to be cognizant of time. I can share this afterwards and happy to answer any questions, but I do want to keep moving just to keep us on track in terms of time. But you see there's a lot of different measures here. So touching a bit on the CCAP, we're working on that at the state level. We don't have as detailed of outputs to share today as the CMAP folks do. I think similarly to their approach, we're going to have kind of a minimum viable product version of the CCAP that we're going to submit to the federal government in December in compliance with our CCAP grant agreement. And then I would expect in Q1 or Q2 of next year, we're going to have a nicer looking and more thorough version of that we will be releasing to the public. So while the deadline here is in December, if folks have stakeholder input in terms of what we're doing at the state level, there may be more opportunities to incorporate that down the road. So I would encourage folks to reach out. But just to say high level, nothing too surprising here. And I think this is largely in sync with what we're seeing on the CMAP plan. Again, while it is challenging to undertake these emissions reductions, understanding the ones that we need to do are not necessarily complicated. I think more or less we know what we need to do to hit our emissions goals, and the challenge is really just in making those things happen. But in the power sector, basically it's cleaning up the electricity generation that we have and then using it much more efficiently as we roll off our fossil emissions. That's what CEJA does for us. And there's a bill under consideration at the legislature right now that would further the work that we set out to do in CEJA. On the building side, it's really making our buildings much more efficient and shifting to clean appliances there. And the major state process on this right now is the future of gas process that is ongoing at the Illinois Commerce Commission, which if folks are not participating in that, it's been really thoughtful, I think, and thorough discussions, and that's going to lead to a report that'll help guide our building decarbonization strategy in the state going forward. On transportation, we got to get people out of cars, give them better options, and then electrify those cars that remain. And you see some of the near-term needs on that. And then on industry, this is a very diverse area, but really it's about heat is one piece. Low and medium is sort of more readily replaceable in the short term with heat pumps. Those high heat industrial processes are more challenging, and we're going to have to find some ways to do that, whether that's innovative electrification technologies or hydrogen or other low carbon or zero carbon gases. And I'd say this is, from a technical perspective, one of the areas that is the most challenging and maybe the least far along. So we have our work cut out for us, I think, on the industry side. Finally, on land use and agriculture, we've got to use our natural lands better. We've got to change the way that we do agriculture, and we've got measures in the CPRG program that help get at this, implement sustainable agriculture practices. We're going to have to ramp all that up quite a bit to get where we're going on the overall CCAP plan. So again, these results are very preliminary. This is just sort of a coarse emissions tool of a draft version of the CCAP we're looking at. So don't make too much of this, but I just wanted to give folks a little bit of a sense of what we're looking at in the CCAP. I expect all of this to be revised and refined before it makes its way to the report that you're ultimately going to see in the public, but I did just want to provide a little bit of context here. So this is where our emissions are headed under a business as usual scenario. You see a lot of progress in the power sector and pretty moderate progress, I'd say, in all other sectors, some decent progress on transportation too. So this is what we're set out to do. Still, I think like a 50% reduction or so from where we were in 2005, but obviously to hit our climate goals, we need to get much further than that by 2050. So again, this is just an indicative, and I know it's a bit hard to see, so apologies here. This is just an indicative emissions curve of, I think, directionally where we're headed on the state CCAP. You see really significant declines in transportation, almost total elimination of emissions from the power sector, big reductions from industry and buildings, and reductions from the water side as well, and then improvements in what we're getting from land use. So again, don't have time to get into detail on this, but just an indicative chart, I think, of where we're headed with the state CCAP. Want to be mindful of time. Edith, can I take like another 60 to 90 seconds here just to wrap up? So noting some of the areas.
Apologies, JC, I was muted. Yes, you can take over 10, 50. Yep, go ahead. We only need 2 minutes to close out, so.
Okay, great. Thank you. Yeah, lot to get through here in a short period. But in terms of where we are seeing and anticipate to see continued progress, we've come a long way in the power sector. We've got a set of policies to continue to do that. I will get to in a second. There are challenges that we need to be mindful of. We've made some good progress in the transportation sector. I think we're seeing a lot of uptick on vehicle electrification, even if it's not quite at the pace that we might like to see for our climate goals. That has been moving organically, which is good. And some reductions, as I say, on the industrial sector, mostly from use of coal declining. As came up earlier, there are real challenges in the power sector as well, even as that's overall a bright spot. What we are seeing from the Trump administration, both with the tariffs and the rollback of the tax credits for clean energy, those two things together are really difficult because we need a lot more electricity to come online if anything close to the projected demand for data centers comes online. I think reasonable people can disagree about how much of that is actually going to show up. But if even 10 or 20% of that shows up, it's going to be a real challenge, not just for Illinois, but everywhere. And at the same time, the lowest cost forms of energy that we have available to us have become more expensive because of what was in HR 1. And just to note that on agriculture, buildings, land use, those have been flat in recent years, even as I think there are opportunities going forward. On the good news side, which I think we need to remember in a really challenging federal environment right now, we are seeing a lot of uptick on electric vehicles again. So I think just like 5 years ago, I want to say we were at under 50,000 electric vehicles in Illinois. We're now at over 150,000. And that is continuing both organically and because of state policies and programs that we're implementing. Heat pumps are continuing to gain market share as well. Again, a lot of that organic, which is good. And clean energy continues to be lower cost than fossils. While it has become more expensive, also everything has become more expensive just with the tariffs. So the competitive advantage of clean energy remains. And I think it's really about how much can we accelerate that. And then just flagging a couple of near-term actions that we're undertaking. For folks who are following this, again, you may be aware there's some omnibus energy legislation that we're hoping to pass in the second week of veto session. Really good discussions there, and I think almost all stakeholders are on board. Obviously, the transit funding is a big thing near term, which I'm sure many of you are very close to. The future of gas proceeding, which I alluded to, that folks can participate in, and in fact, I'd encourage you to. We have a 1 million EV goal by 2030, and we need to implement CPRG and other programs. So I could talk about this for an hour, but we did have limited time today. So if this is something that folks would be interested in talking about more in a future session, would be happy to do that. But again, really appreciate everybody's time today.
Sure. JC, thank you so much for that. And is there any questions for JC? We didn't see any, and if not, I might just ask a prompting question here. Nobody has a question on that. And I'm sorry you had to buzz through that so quickly. JC, I guess just for to kind of close out and tie things up a little bit, could you just talk about how the two plans are related, at the regional level and at the state level?
Yeah, certainly. I think maybe the biggest difference is that obviously the CMAP plan includes a bunch of local actions. It is more granular, and we just don't, to do that at the state level would not really be possible to model, policies in every country in the state. So it is bigger picture, but I think there is a lot of commonality in terms of what we're looking at with state policies and federal policies. As the CMAP folks mentioned, we are not going to, in the same way that we're not going to be able to do everything we need to do on climate with local action alone, we can't do it with state action alone either. So I think we're going to be honest here in calling out, here are the policies that we can implement at the state level, but also what we're going to need at the federal level to hit those goals. So I do think, we talk regularly to the CMAP folks about what each of us is planning in the CCAP. I expect to see a lot of similarity in terms of the state and federal level actions that both of those plans contemplate. Theirs is just a bit more granular, and also at the state level, we have to get at some things that are maybe less relevant for the CMAP region, like agriculture, not a big piece of the emissions there in a way that it is at the state level. So the emissions profile and the sectors are a bit different, but I think more in common than different, mostly a difference of scope.
Okay, thank you. And Allison has a question, but what I'm going to do is call on you in just a second. For those who have to leave right away at 11, let me just thank you for being here and invite you to the next Energy and Environment Committee meeting, where we will be unveiling or inviting you to participate in our new recycling education and outreach project, which is also funded by the US EPA, where we launched a campaign called Feed the Cart. And we'll be sharing on social media, and it's also on our webpage. That is November 18th. It's our regular meeting date, 9:30 to 11 via Zoom. As usual, we are tentatively planning a sustainability social event. We had one this summer. We'll be looking for an in-person event. Tentatively planned for the south suburbs for December 4th. in the afternoon. If you have any quick feedback on that, let us know. We learned we have a conflict with a SSMMA event. So thank you for that. Please join us. We will post the recording on the Environment Committee webpage, as we always do, as well as all the slides. And so with that, thank you if you need to leave. Otherwise, we'd love to hear Allison's question and JC's response.
Great. Thank you so much. Well, first of all, JC, thank you for mentioning the stretch code grant. As you probably know, Aurora has been awarded that grant. So we're actually trying to get it through council right now to approve the acceptance of that grant. So today we have a big meeting with the committee of the whole. So fingers crossed that goes well. But my question was, how can municipalities stay updated on what is happening during this veto session with some of those bills that you mentioned?
Good question. I think there's I mean, I don't know that there's updates, coming out of that from our office or anything. It's, it sounds a little oversimplified, but I'd say keep an eye on CapFacts. Is probably the best way. They have pretty good coverage. I think if we do pass a bill, I would expect there to be an announcement from the governor's office and things like that. I'd say the bill is pretty baked at this point. So if folks are thinking I'd like to see this, that, or the other thing in the bill, I regret to inform you it may be a bit late for that. Although there will be more energy bills and there's things we can do outside of the session, but. If it's of interest to this group, I could talk a bit about some of what is in that, but if that is not useful for folks, I don't want to, go down a rabbit hole.
I mean, I personally would be interested, but, I don't want to monopolize the conversation either.
Allison sort of hinted at a very good point that might not have gotten addressed, but how can folks stay up to date with CPRG programs as they're being rolled out in the grant deadlines?
Yes. So on that, we have IEPA has a climate pollution reduction grants webpage. So you can see that on there. We're actually in the process of updating it right now. So I actually don't know that those grants are on there yet, but we are working to update that page so that all the grants are on it. I know our team at IEPA is doing that. You also can sign up for email updates. So that might be the best way to do that.
Mm-hmm. And my oversight, but the Mayor's Caucus is also managing low-income energy efficiency accountability committee for IQ North. This is a very, very recent development. We just got the contract September 28th and announced the grant in 8 days. So that grant is now open and available for low-income energy efficiency outreach and education. So take advantage of that. The deadline's coming up very quickly on November 5th as well. So with that, I know there's much more to hear. So maybe JC will have you back sometime. We can better understand the CCAP when yours is done and what the implementation projects look like and their status. So thank you everyone for joining us, and to the CMAP team for presenting, and for JC for joining us, and for all of you for your participation. Sorry we ran a bit over, but very glad to have the turnout and engagement. We'll see you in November.